The garage outlet sparked at 3:42 a.m., and David Chun's eyes snapped open. Again, the electrical engineer, 43 years old with 2 decades of experience at Pacific Power Systems, grabbed his phone and checked the smart meter app he'd installed 3 weeks ago. Spike after spike, every single night between midnight and 6 a.m., his monthly electricity bill had jumped from $112 to $473 in just 2 months. And he'd finally figured out why. His neighbor, Trevor Mason, was running an extension cord under their shared fence and charging his brand new Tesla Model S on David's dime. $4,000 worth of stolen electricity over 8 weeks. But tonight, David wasn't just watching the numbers climb. Tonight, he had everything documented, every theft timestamp, every kilowatt hour recorded. And what Trevor didn't know was that the exhausted engineer he'd been stealing from had spent the last 3 weeks building a case that would cost him far more than money. Before we dive into how David turned his neighbor's theft into the most expensive charging session of his life. If you love stories where entitled people finally face real consequences and justice is served with precision, hit that like button and subscribe. Now, let's see exactly how this electrical engineer made his neighbor pay. This is a story in 3 parts. The violation that pushed a skilled professional too far. The confrontation where technical expertise became a weapon. And the resolution where theft met its price tag. The violation built slowly, like water damage behind a wall. David noticed the bill increases first, then the outlet warmth, then the faint hum of current flowing when nothing in his garage was running. He checked everything twice, replaced breakers, tested circuits, convinced himself he was imagining things. But engineers don't imagine phantom electrical loads. The discovery of that extension cord changed everything. What followed were weeks of documentation, sleepless nights watching thieves drain his power, and the slow burn of rage that comes from being stolen from in your own home, while authorities shrug and say it's a civil matter. The confrontation came when Trevor made his biggest mistake, getting cocky. David caught him adjusting the connection at 2 a.m., and what Trevor saw in that moment was a tired man in pajamas asking questions. What he didn't see was someone who'd spent 3 weeks learning every detail of his life, building an airtight case, and calculating exactly how much this theft would cost. The power dynamic shifted the moment David started reading account numbers and legal codes. Trevor's smug expression crumbled. The extension cord that had seemed so clever became evidence in David's hands. The resolution delivered satisfaction that money can't buy. Trevor thought he'd negotiate, charm his way out, maybe pay $50 and call it even. Instead, he got an itemized invoice, legal documentation, and a choice that left him pale and shaking. What happened over the next 48 hours involved his parents, his employer, the homeowners association, and consequences that rippled far beyond a 4-figure bill. Justice, David learned, doesn't always come from police reports or small claims court. Sometimes it comes from knowing exactly what you're doing and refusing to be anyone's victim. Here's exactly how it happened. David Chun had purchased a modest 3-bedroom house in Riverside, California 6 years ago, right after his divorce. The electrical engineer worked 60-hour weeks designing power distribution systems for commercial buildings. And the small ranch-style home with its detached 2-car garage represented stability after a chaotic year. He lived alone, worked long hours, and prided himself on maintaining everything properly. His garage housed his woodworking equipment, his vintage motorcycle restoration project, and a well-organized tool collection that would make any craftsman jealous. The space was his sanctuary, and he knew every outlet, every circuit, every wire that ran through the walls. Trevor Mason moved in next door 4 months ago. 32 years old, working in tech sales for some startup David never quite understood. Driving a gleaming white Tesla Model S that Trevor mentioned in every conversation. The car cost $85,000. Trevor announced at the neighborhood barbecue and got 300 miles per charge. David nodded politely, more interested in the property line discussion with the couple on his other side. Trevor's rental house shared a fence with David's garage, but the properties had separate utilities, separate meters, separate everything. At least, that's what David thought. The first electricity bill that seemed wrong arrived in late June. David opened the envelope expecting his usual $112 and found $247 instead. He frowned, checked his usage history on the utility website, saw massive spikes between midnight and 6 a.m. His first thought was a faulty appliance. Maybe the old refrigerator in the garage finally dying and running constantly. He spent an entire weekend testing everything, unplugging appliances one by one, checking for phantom loads. Nothing explained the consumption. The second bill came in July, $391. David's methodical engineer's mind started mapping possibilities. He installed a smart meter monitoring system on his phone, the kind that tracks real-time usage down to individual appliances. And that's when he saw it, clear as daylight on his screen. Every night around midnight, his power consumption spiked by exactly 7.2 kilowatts for 6 hours, then stopped. Like clockwork, David stood in his garage at 1 a.m. on a Tuesday, having taken the next day off work, and listened. The faint hum of electricity under heavy load vibrated through the wall outlet near the fence. He traced the circuit, checked the breaker, confirmed nothing on his side should be drawing that kind of power. Then he stepped outside, flashlight in hand, and walked the fence line. That's when he found it. An orange heavy-duty extension cord, half buried in decorative bark, running from Trevor's side under a gap in the fence boards, connecting to David's exterior garage outlet. The outlet David had installed last year specifically for his motorcycle battery tender. The rage that filled him in that moment was cold and calculating. Trevor wasn't just stealing electricity. He was stealing thousands of dollars worth, risking electrical fire, violating property, and doing it with the kind of casual arrogance that suggested he thought he'd never get caught. David didn't confront Trevor immediately. He documented everything. Took photos with timestamps, recorded video of the extension cord connection, called the police, who sent an officer 3 days later. The cop, barely out of his 20s, listened to David's explanation with visible boredom. "It's a civil matter," he said, writing nothing down. "You could disconnect it or talk to your neighbor or take him to small claims court." No report filed. No investigation. Just a shrug and a suggestion that David handle it himself. When David tried calling the utility company, they said they couldn't help with theft from a private outlet, only meter tampering. Dead end after dead end. He tried the direct approach one Saturday morning. Knocked on Trevor's door at 10 a.m., rehearsing reasonable words. Trevor answered in Tesla-branded athletic wear, Bluetooth headset in his ear, clearly in the middle of a call. David waited. Trevor kept talking for 3 minutes while David stood there. Finally, "Yeah?" Trevor said, not removing the headset. David explained calmly about the electricity theft, the bills, the extension cord. Trevor's expression shifted from mild confusion to amused dismissal. "Dude, I have no idea what you're talking about. Maybe check your wiring? Old houses have problems." Then he closed the door. David stood there, humiliated and furious, as Trevor's laughter echoed from inside. The headset hadn't even been on a call. It was theater, a dismissal, a message that David wasn't worth basic respect. That night, David stopped expecting anyone else to fix this. He opened his laptop and started researching. Within 48 hours, he'd found Trevor's full employment history on professional networking sites. His parents' names and address from property records, his girlfriend's social media accounts, every speeding ticket he'd accumulated, and his rental agreement details. David calculated the exact theft amount using his utility rate and Trevor's Tesla's charging specifications. 7.2 kilowatt charger running 6 hours nightly for 8 weeks, equaled 336 hours of stolen power at $0.32 per kilowatt hour. The math was simple. 2,416 kilowatt hours stolen. $773, not counting the increased tier rates David had been pushed into. David documented everything in a spreadsheet that would make an accountant weep with joy. Then he installed a lockable outdoor outlet cover and started planning. If Trevor wanted to play games, David would show him what happened when you stole from someone who understood electrical systems, legal liability, and the precise cost of arrogance. And on Thursday, August 15th, at exactly 2 a.m., everything was finally ready. David sat in his darkened garage. Laptop open, security camera feed displaying 4 angles of his property. He had installed the cameras 3 days ago, motion activated, and recording the cloud storage that Trevor couldn't erase even if he tried. The smart outlet monitor showed exactly what David expected. At 1:47 a.m., the power draw spiked. 7.2 kilowatts. Trevor was charging again, but this time David had removed the lock an hour earlier, leaving the outlet accessible. Bait for a trap. At 2:03 a.m., David's motion sensor alerted him to movement along the fence line. He watched Trevor's silhouette on the camera, adjusting something near the connection point. David stood, grabbed his folder of documentation, and walked outside. The garage's side door opened with a metallic click that made Trevor freeze. David flipped on the motion sensor floodlight he'd installed, bathing the fence line in harsh white light. Trevor straightened, caught like a deer, the orange extension cord visible in his hands. For a moment, neither spoke. "Working late?" David asked, his voice steady and cold. Trevor's expression cycled through surprise, calculation, and landed on dismissive confidence. "Just checking my equipment, man." "What are you doing up?" David walked closer, stopping 6 feet away. "Checking my electricity that you've been stealing for 8 weeks. That equipment plugged into my outlet, Trevor?" "Let's talk about it." Trevor's laugh came too quickly, too forced. "Dude, I think you're confused. This is my cord, my side of the fence." David pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and turned it around. The video showed Trevor running the cord under the fence, clear footage from 4 different nights. "That's my outlet, Trevor Michael Mason, age 32. Living at 847 Maple Drive, Unit B, renting from Westside Property Management. Employment at TechFlow Solutions as a sales associate, reporting to Jennifer Carlisle. Your Tesla Model S, VIN number 5YJ3E1EA8KF123847, has a 7.2 kilowatt onboard charger. You've been connecting it to my property every night since June 20th. Would you like me to continue?" The confidence drained from Trevor's face like water from a broken glass. "How do you—" David cut him off. "I'm an electrical engineer, Trevor. I design power systems for a living. Did you really think I wouldn't figure this out? That I wouldn't document everything? That I wouldn't know exactly what you've stolen and exactly what it's worth?" David pulled a printed document from his folder. 336 hours of power consumption at 7.2 kilowatts equals 2,416 kilowatt hours. At my utility rate, accounting for tier escalation you pushed me into, that's $947 in stolen electricity. Add the increased service charges, the equipment I purchased to catch you, and the time I've spent dealing with this, we're at $1,230. But let's call it even $1,000, Trevor. That's what you owe me." Trevor's mouth opened, closed, open again. "That's insane. I'm not paying that." "You can't prove anything." David smiled, and it wasn't friendly. "I have time-stamped video of you connecting the cord. Smart meter data showing exact consumption matching your charging times. Photos of your extension cord on my property. Security footage from 4 different angles. Your own social media posts about charging your Tesla at home, which is fascinating since your rental unit doesn't have EV charging installed. I've already spoken with your landlord, Westside Property Management. They confirmed your lease prohibits installing charging equipment. So where exactly were you charging, Trevor?" The color left Trevor's face. "You called my landlord?" David's expression didn't change. "I called several people." Research phase. I also have copies of California Penal Code 498, Theft of Utility Services, which classifies this as petty theft. And since you've stolen over $950, we're approaching the grand theft threshold. I have documentation ready for small claims court, including photos I'll be happy to share with your employer's ethics board. Since TechFlow's handbook specifically mentions criminal conduct as grounds for termination, your boss, Jennifer, seemed very interested when I spoke with her assistant about scheduling the call. Trevor's knees actually buckled. He caught himself on the fence. You can't do this. You're not. This is harassment. David's voice remained level, almost gentle. No, Trevor. Harassment is stealing from your neighbor for 2 months straight. This is consequences. And here's how this works. You have 2 options. David held up one finger. Option 1. I file a police report tomorrow with all my documentation. I file in small claims court for the full $1,230 plus court costs. I send copies of everything to your landlord, your employer, and I post the security footage on our neighborhood social media group so everyone knows you're a thief. Your rental lease has a clause about illegal activity Westside can terminate with 30 days notice. TechFlow's ethics policy is very clear about criminal conduct, and you'll have a legal judgment on your record that'll show up on background checks for 7 years. He held up a second finger. Option 2. You pay me $1,000 within 48 hours. Cash or certified check. You remove your extension cord permanently and never set foot on my property again. You sign a confession and agreement I prepared, admitting the theft and agreeing to the payment. And this ends quietly. No police, no employer, no social media, no court. Just you making this right. Trevor's voice came out hoarse. I don't have $1,000. David's smile turned colder. Then call your parents. Donald and Patricia Mason at 1847 Westwood Avenue in Pasadena? I'm sure they'd love to know what their son's been up to. Or ask your girlfriend Brittany. Her Instagram shows plenty of expensive dinners and weekend trips. Find the money, Trevor. You found $85,000 for a Tesla you can't afford to charge legally. Trevor's hand shook as he gripped the fence. This is blackmail. David shook his head slowly. No, blackmail is demanding money for silence about something that isn't illegal. This is restitution for theft you committed. I'm offering you a chance to handle this privately instead of publicly. That's called mercy, not blackmail. And here's the thing, Trevor. I have nothing to lose. I own my house. I have a stable career. I'm not the one stealing power because I can't afford my lifestyle. You have everything to lose. Your job, your housing, your reputation. Think very carefully about which option sounds better. The silence stretched for 30 seconds. Finally, Trevor whispered, 48 hours? David nodded. Until Saturday at 2 p.m. You'll meet me at my front door with payment and sign the agreement. Miss that deadline, and I start making phone calls. Oh, and Trevor? David reached down and unplugged the extension cord from his outlet, holding it up. Your charging session is over, permanently. Trevor took the cord with trembling hands, stumbled back toward his yard, and disappeared into the darkness. David watched him go, then walked back into his garage, folder in hand. He sat down at his workbench, opened his laptop, and saved all the camera footage to 3 separate backup locations. Then he smiled for the first time in 8 weeks. The next 48 hours will be very interesting. Saturday arrived with cloudless, blue sky and temperatures pushing 95 degrees. David spent the morning in his garage, organizing tools and watching his front door camera feed on his phone. At 1:47 p.m., a silver Honda Accord pulled up to his curb, and Trevor climbed out of the passenger seat. His mother, Patricia Mason, exited the driver's side. David noted her expensive handbag and the tension in Trevor's shoulders as they walked to his front door. This was going to be interesting. David opened the door before they could knock. Patricia looked to be in her late 50s, professionally dressed, and wearing an expression that could cut glass. "Mr. Chun, I'm Patricia Mason, Trevor's mother. We need to discuss this situation." David stepped aside, gesturing to his living room. "Please, come in." Trevor followed his mother like a condemned man walking to sentencing, refusing to meet David's eyes. They sat. David placed his documentation folder on the coffee table. Patricia spoke first, her voice controlled but furious. Trevor explained what he did. "I want to see your evidence before we proceed." David appreciated directness. He pulled out the printed timeline, the smart meter data, the photos, and queued up the video on his tablet. Patricia watched everything in silence, her jaw tightening with each piece of evidence. When the final video played, showing Trevor adjusting the connection at 2 a.m., she closed her eyes briefly. "This is unacceptable," she said, and David realized she wasn't talking to him. She turned to Trevor, and her voice dropped to the lethal calm of parental disappointment. "You stole from your neighbor for 2 months. You lied to me about your charging setup. You put this man in a position where he had to spend weeks documenting your theft because you thought you were clever." Trevor sank lower into the couch. Patricia turned back to David. "The $1,000 is fair. Here's a certified check. Trevor wrote an apology that I reviewed. He'll sign whatever agreement you've prepared." David hadn't expected this level of cooperation. He pulled out the agreement he drafted, 2 pages of clear language admitting the theft, confirming payment, and waiving any future claims. Trevor signed with a shaking hand, his mother witnessing. Patricia added her own signature as guarantor. Then she pulled out her phone. "Trevor, give me your phone." He hesitated. "Mom," her look silenced him. He handed it over. Patricia scrolled through something, then showed David the screen. It was Trevor's banking app. "As of this morning, I've taken over his accounts temporarily. He's also moving back home with us for the next 6 months while he pays off his debts and learns to live within his means. The Tesla is being sold next week." Trevor's head snapped up. "What?" "You can't." Patricia's voice cut through his protest like a blade. "I can, and I am. You can't afford that car. You never could. This theft happened because you prioritize ego over ethics. You'll drive my old Camry, and you'll think about your choices every time you see it." David felt an unexpected pang of something almost like sympathy. Almost. Patricia wasn't finished. His landlord, Westside Property Management, has been notified that he's breaking his lease early. I'll pay the penalty. He's also going to write personal apologies to every neighbor on this street, explaining what he did and taking responsibility. No excuses. No minimizing. Real accountability. Trevor looked like he might be ill. David had planned for resistance, argument, maybe threats. He had him planned for a mother who apparently believed in consequences more thoroughly than he did. Patricia stood, extending her hand to David. "Thank you for handling this privately. Many people would have gone straight to police or social media. Trevor doesn't deserve your discretion, but his father and I appreciate it. If he causes you any further problems, call me directly." She handed David a business card. "Patricia Mason, Senior Partner, Westwood Law Associates." David suddenly understood where Trevor's situation had gone from bad to nuclear. His mother was an attorney who specialized in civil litigation. Trevor had stolen from a neighbor, gotten caught, and confessed everything to a lawyer. As they prepared to leave, Patricia paused. "Out of curiosity, Mr. Chun, what would you have done if Trevor had refused to pay?" David considered his answer. Filed in small claims court, shared the documentation with relevant parties, and let consequences play out naturally. "I wasn't bluffing." Patricia nodded, something like respect in her eyes. "I didn't think you were. Engineers rarely do." She turned to her son. "Say what you need to say, Trevor." Trevor finally looked at David, and the cocky tech bro was gone. In his place was someone who looked exhausted and ashamed. "I'm sorry. I thought I was being clever, saving money, that you wouldn't notice or wouldn't care. I was wrong about all of it. What I did was theft, and it was wrong. The words sounded rehearsed, but the misery in his voice seemed genuine. David nodded. Actions have consequences, Trevor. Sometimes expensive ones. Learn from this. Trevor nodded, unable to speak, and followed his mother to the car. David watched them drive away, then looked at the certified check in his hand. $1,000, exactly as calculated. He thought about depositing it, decided to wait until Monday, and walked back into his house. The garage outlet was secure with a commercial-grade lockable cover now, and his electricity bill had already dropped back to normal. The security cameras stayed active, but Trevor's extension cord never reappeared. 2 months later, David sat in his garage on a Saturday morning, working on his motorcycle restoration. The engine was finally running clean, the exhaust note deep and satisfying. His electricity bill sat on his workbench, $108. Normal, reasonable, exactly what it should be. Through his garage window, he could see the rental house next door had a new tenant, a young family with 2 kids who'd introduced themselves politely and asked about the neighborhood. Trevor's Tesla had been replaced by a minivan in their driveway. David's friend Marcus stopped by that afternoon, bringing coffee and curiosity. "Whatever happened with that neighbor stealing your power?" Marcus asked, leaning against the workbench. David smiled, remembering Patricia Mason's steel-edged disappointment and Trevor's complete collapse. He paid what he owed. Moved out. Learned an expensive lesson. Marcus laughed. Bet he thinks twice before messing with an engineer again. David picked up his wrench, turning back to the motorcycle. Probably. But more importantly, I learned something too. Marcus raised an eyebrow. What's that? David tightened the bolt, testing the connection. That sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom or a police report. Sometimes it comes from refusing to be a victim, from documenting everything, from knowing exactly what you're owed and demanding it. Trevor thought he found an easy mark, someone too tired or too passive to fight back. He was wrong. David stood, wiping oil from his hands. The best part? His own mother became his worst consequence. I was ready for war, and she delivered justice better than I ever could have. Marcus whistled low. Remind me never to steal from you. David grinned. Reminder unnecessary. You're not stupid enough to charge your price on someone else's dime. They both laughed, and David returned to his work. The motorcycle engine purred under his attention. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted his property in gold. His property, his electricity, his peace, earned and protected. And as David sat there in his sanctuary, surrounded by his tools and his projects and his perfectly normal electricity bill, he smiled. Because justice, whether served hot with confrontation or cold with documentation, was equally satisfying across the country in Portland, Oregon. Retired landscape architect Margaret Reeves was pruning her award-winning rose garden when her HOA president demanded she remove the excessive flowers for violating community standards. Margaret smiled the same smile she'd worn 30 years ago when she personally designed the neighborhood's original landscaping plan and written the bylaws that the HOA apparently hadn't bothered reading. Please, she said quietly, pulling out a folder marked Original Covenant, 1994. Keep talking about violations. I'd love to explain to the board exactly who owns the rights to modify these standards. The president went pale, recognizing the name on the document signatures. But that's a story for another time.